Very much, Eric. As earlier mentioned, the man in the ring tonight is a straight shooter, a senior counsel credited with the nullification of President Uhuru Kenyatta's election in 2017. It's Senate Minority Leader James Bob Orengo. Welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Let's start with some viewer questions writing into us at K24 TV. Thank you for that, by the way. Someone here says, just asking, safari ya Kenan bado ipo ama mamba zimezuia njia?
Kuna mamba lakini ni wachache, si kama hapa awali.
Umeanza kuangamiza?
Kabisa.
All right. And who would the mamba be?
The mamba are in all forms of shapes. Some in terms of political leaders.
Right.
Some in terms of political institutions. And some because the status quo is always against change.
I put it to you, the mambas you're referring to, or according to you, the Deputy President and IEBC.
The Deputy President to some extent, but it's not our worry because he belongs to another party. But I think the problem is that that party seems to be dysfunctional. And it was our hope that he should be reading from the same script with the president and leader of our party.
That was your hope?
It was our hope, but it doesn't really it doesn't really matter at the end, because whenever, or rather when the agreement was made, it was made between the leaders of the two parties. Just like, you know, you remember during the Grand Coalition government, when the agreement was signed at Harambee House, it was basically the Prime Minister, or Raila Odinga, who became Prime Minister.
Right. And
President Mwai Kibaki. And I can tell you at that time, even before the signing of that agreement, for the Grand Coalition government, there was a lot of resistance.
Okay.
And similarly now, I think there's a lot of resistance also.
Okay. You are a supporter of the handshake between the president and the former prime minister. You termed it, quote, a game changer that will be remembered for centuries to come. But after bringing peace, this is what, 2 years ago?
Yes.
Has the handshake really affected anything else in the country other than the chances of the deputy president becoming president?
I think it has changed quite a bit in the sense that, you know, in order to bring about development, you need, you know, some modicum of peace in the country. Secondly, we can now focus on the BBI, Building Bridges Initiative. I think without the kind of handshake that there was a principled handshake between Uhuru Kenyatta and Raila Odinga, the Building Bridges Initiative would have been difficult. But historically, and I'm saying this having watched the Kenyan scene, it has never been easy from one political formation to completely throw out another political formation in order to bring about change or reform. It is always a Lancaster Conference. It is always an IPPG. It is always a Grand Coalition government.
Some kind of talking has to happen.
Some kind of talking on both sides.
You had a month before the handshake declared that President Kenyatta would, quote, relinquish power prematurely. Uhuru will surrender the presidency without bloodshed being involved. Raila will thereafter take up the reins of government. And whereas you have now clarified that there's usually some sort of agreement, we don't see a relinquishing of power. On the contrary, President Kenyatta is possibly more powerful now in handshake with Raila Odinga and the killing of an effective opposition than previously.
I don't think so. If you see the flow of people who go to Capitol Hill, you know, from cabinet secretaries to principal secretaries to political leaders.
You're saying power has shifted to Capitol Hill?
And I'm saying that it has not completely shifted, but you can see there are two centers of power, political power, so to speak. But as the President Uhuru relinquishing power, probably I was not, you know, accurately quoted. But what I meant was that as we progress towards 2022, some kind of sharing of power, if not through institutional change, but by political practice, you would see things taking quite a different direction.
You're alluding to the possibility of some constitutional change?
No. I think it was clear at the beginning that the handshake was not about power sharing, but I'm saying the way the state is exercising authority at the moment, the opposition and the party in power have got some semblance of committee of interest at the same time in decision making.
So you are telling the country tonight that the handshake has brought about two centers of power. That President Kenyatta is not as powerful as he was in his first term.
Under this constitution, he was not meant to be as powerful as people imagine. If you read the old constitution, power vested in the president. In the current constitution, power is not vested in the president. And I think that was for good measure. So that we have designed a process in which the opposition and the government in power can work together. And to that extent, there's a give and take. I think the Kenyan case is very unique, where you have a leader of opposition and the president being involved in consultations and working together to manage the affairs of the nation.
Are you saying that what is going on right now, and it seems like that is what you have actually said in conclusion, is that decisions that are being made on everything that we're witnessing happening in the country are being made in complete consultation with the two centers of power agreeing? The President of the Republic and the People's President.
I may not say it is complete, but I think substantially, when it comes to political decisions and the exercise of that decision, there is some consultation. At the level of making decisions, the consultations may be on equal terms, but at the level of implementation, of course, the president then drives the executive.
And you've also talked about seeing this progress going into before 2022. Institutionally, what exactly does that mean? Institutionally,
I mean through the Building Bridges initiative, there's going to be a report, and from that report, the recommendations will be turned into constitutional questions, which will lead to a referendum. Now, those institutional changes, be it at the electoral level, be it in terms of bringing more inclusivity, be it structure of the executive, I think at the level of institutional reform and change will come once this report is out, and we are now at the level of campaigning.
And which institutions do you believe?
I think one is the structure of the executive. We have realized that the executive, unless it is well structured, the same imperial presidency and exclusivity in the managing of public affairs persists. So you need some form of government that encourages inclusivity. I know that when we talk about this, a lot of people are thinking that we want to create offices. Inclusivity can come about depending on what formation, or rather the structure of the executive that is established. Like in South Africa, you have a parliamentary system with a president, or you may even have an executive president who rules through parliament, and therefore their system is essentially parliamentary.
Right.
So to that extent, you are likely to bring on board many other political formations into government or involve in decision-making through a parliamentary process.
And we'll talk in detail about that when we talk about possible constitution reviews. So you've talked about possible changes to the structure of the executive. Any other institution you see that would a BBI process would recommend reform to? IBC, perhaps?
Yeah, IBC. I think we have not managed our elections very well. I think the appointment of the electoral body, I think we still need to think about it seriously. But the best, I would imagine, and this has been proposed at one time practice during the Moi era, when you had commissioners nominated by political parties.
Right. And it is curious that you speak with such authority on what you expect BBI to present, proposals that will be converted into questions for a referendum. While the rest of the country is waiting to see that document, how is it that you can be so authoritative on the matter?
Well, if you read the document that President Uhuru Kenyatta and Raila Amolo Odinga signed, on the 9 issues, they all revolve around some of the things I've talked about.
But it's not given that that is what Kenyans would have said in response.
It is not given, but I think it was somewhere in the recommendations. But I agree with you at the end, the public may not necessarily agree with what comes out in the report. And if they don't agree, during that phase of report and formulation of the questions, the public can have their own input. Like the governors now have come out with an input that I think is going to be fed into the Building Bridges initiative.
I put it to you that you have known all along what exactly BBI will come out with, and what it was intended to come out with is this predetermined outcome that the Deputy President and his allies have been talking about, one whose sole purpose is to ensure that power is shared between President Uhuru Kenyatta, who would then run government, and the former Prime Minister, who would assume other responsibilities.
Wrong. If it was predetermined, then going around the country receiving views and then reporting back to the country and then having a national conversation about the report, that would have been absolutely unnecessary. And I think...
But it was for show. That's what they're saying.
No. I mean, for example, with the momentum and the goodwill that existed more than a year ago, they could have driven the question of the referendum right out of the outset. But they saw what had happened before. I mean, you remember during the Kibaki government, or the first NAC government, when the Kilifi draft was rushed to the country said no. And I think both President Kenyatta and Raila were quite conscious that, you know, you may have an idea that may be appealing, but may not necessarily be appealing to the public.
But you're so confident on this referendum proposal. Have you read the report? I dare ask, are you writing it?
Yeah, I'm not
Is it originating from your office?
I am not writing it. I've not seen it. I'm just waiting like...
Is this another prophecy like the one we played at
the
beginning
of the program? It's not another prophecy. But I can say with substantial confidence that the questions that I'm talking about, if they are not addressed in that report and does not lead to a referendum, we'll be back to square one. You know, we have tried to bring about reform in circles, and every time I don't think we have really succeeded.
In 2017, you denied Jubilee's claims that NASA was planning to have a referendum to create positions for its principals. You said, quote, Jubilee is now running short of ideas. They are working on propaganda. I don't know where the idea of a referendum is coming from. And now you're saying that a referendum is the only answer.
Yeah, but you know, we remember as NASA, we had come out with the Core Kenya initiative, I think as CORD, because at that time...
That's CORD, right?
Yeah, we had come out with the Core Kenya initiative. We tried to drive it through, but you know what happened in IBC to deny us that 1 million number of voters, you know.
How come Ekuro Okot could pull it off?
I could ask you the same question. Somebody without any structures, any resources, not a strong party, a party which could not even win a single seat during the last elections.
I put it to you, you're a sore loser, Mr. Orengo, that we saw the signatures that came out. Some of it was pretty much, you know, just dwindling with a pen, that the party was overconfident, didn't do its homework, and didn't collect the signatures to begin with.
We're not sore losers. When we lose, we accept it. And those who have lost elections have turned out on top, you know. Churchill lost elections.
Which election have you lost and
Lincoln
accepted?
Lost elections. I have lost elections as a member of parliament.
As ODM?
In 1997, Raila lost presidential elections. And at that time, he didn't go into the streets. He tried to bring, you know, Kibaki and everybody in the opposition together to change the electoral laws.
I want to return to the handshake, and it appears that the only substantial thing that the handshake has definitively changed is ODM itself. That it has turned out to become an apologist for a government that it believed should have been censured right at the very top, with even calls for impeachment from yourself.
Well, you know, there are a lot of things which are happening which we don't agree with. But we think there's a greater good achieved if we can change the way we govern ourselves. If I begin to talk about the litany of the things that I think are going wrong,
tell us some in brief.
There are many.
What do you think the government is still doing wrong?
Yeah, for example, the level of borrowing is too high. And we have come to believe in deficit financing. That can be extremely dangerous. Kibaki used to talk about two things, borrowing and expenditure. You got to watch out what type of expenditure you're making.
Yet Raila Odinga accompanied President Kenyatta to China and seeking the second loan. Yes,
well, there's a kind of borrowing, that can lead into major development and job creation. But I think somewhere along the way, this government does not structure its borrowing in a way that you can see immediate returns. Like, for example, I think if Kibaki and Raila were still in that government, the Grand Coalition government, SGR would have been completed at a cheaper rate and probably would have gotten a better deal than we have at the moment.
You said that there are things that you still have issue with, and you've talked about loans, and I've challenged you on that and said that, your party leader went ahead on another loan quest. And I earlier asked you whether the master stroke in this was the killing of an effective opposition. I put it to you that you proved my point, because whereas you have these grievances, we don't hear about them. You're quiet about them now.
We are quiet because we want to create an environment that can bring about these changes that we think are going to enable us to address the problems that we face. For example, one of the ways that Kibaki and Raila dealt with corruption is by closing loopholes. You don't wait for people to steal money and then you drag them into court. You're just making it possible for these cartels to make corruption, I mean, they will do it in a bigger way because they know the risks are higher. But I think if you go to Singapore and Taiwan and those places with like quoting, is that those loopholes must be closed. And I think that approach in government is still non-existent.
Your silence is more likely to allow the administration to continue carrying out what you think is wrong than it is to foster good.
Well, you remember from 2017 until the handshake, people were crying that, we just like making noise. Or what is it that we want to put on the table? Now we have an agenda with both sides are put on the table. And I think we've got a time frame. I can say without any fear of contradiction that if the handshake does not graduate into constitutional changes and amendments by the middle of the year next year, then even
by the middle of the year next year.
Yeah. Then I think we are going to go into a phase where President Uhuru is going to look more like a lame duck, and our base is also going to be very impatient. So it's not like we have got all the time in the world. And we are quite conscious that these things must be done.
Why would he look like a lame duck if he doesn't deliver a referendum?
No, not just the referendum, but there's a stage where when the incumbent begins now to lose the authority of the office. I saw it under President Kibaki. It was the end of his, his 10 years. He was, to some extent, a lame duck president. It was the civil servants and the political forces who were pushing government towards whatever directions was being taken. You remember President Moi, towards the end, when he thought he could pick and choose the leaders he wanted. Nobody listened. In fact, there was then huge migration.
And you think President Kenyatta enters that season sometime next year?
Sometime next year, if he doesn't watch it.
All right.
And you can see how Central
Kenya is already behaving.
Is also behaving.
We'll talk more politics, more about constitutional change, and so much more with James Orengo. What a set of names there. After this, you're watching Punchline.